Hello everyone, Travis Pfeiffer Rudros here, and I am joined by one of my absolute favorite people in the Final Fantasy TCG world. He is Steve D of the YYT, a man who needs no introduction, but I gave him one anyway. Steve, how are you, sir?
I'm very good, thank you. We're in the middle of a very heated time for FFTCG. I think that Opus 15 and 16 have had some of the absolute highs of card design, and I get high off that energy too.
That was a perfect way to set this up, because I feel that very much right now. As I do feel a lot of highs with the game right now, but I do feel some lows as well. So we're going to talk about that, and I'm excited to have you here because maybe I can give some of the NA perspective, whereas you can give me more of the European perspective, because, you know, we hear bits and things, and like I got to see the replay of ReRaise on Twitch, but that only really tells me so much. So maybe we'll get to learn.
Particularly in the case of London's ReRaise, I think only the last 4 rounds of Swiss were recorded, and that was mostly sort of games that were on the bubble of, you know, if the loser can't make top cut kind of games. Yeah. I don't think frequently the very top tables worth of games, and it's always been the case that there's a huge cultural divide between North America and Europe, and then I kind of want to say Europe and further east. So the decks that you see in each of these areas are so radically different, and the way that they are played, and I suppose the perspective of what cards are most toxic as well, or what most powerful decks are. It's interesting to see how little there is to agree on. So yeah. I'd be delighted to share some of my time zones perspectives.
One perfect example of that is Soirees. In America, Soirees is everywhere. At our ReRaise event in Florida, I think it was half of the top cut. So it was top 16. 8 of the decks were Soiree decks. But from what I hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're not nearly as popular over there, and I hear they're even less popular in Japan. Like, maybe they just started picking up steam. But so that alone is like, wow, why do we value it so much versus, you know, why does nobody over there? Has Soirees changed at all? Do people like it? How's it rate over there?
I don't think anyone likes it. I think even the people who do and did play it over here don't really like it. And I understand that to introduce a new tribe into the game, to introduce a new job that is meant to look like a competitive deck, you have to push them, because there's 16 sets to catch up on. Whereas Samurais, you know, we've kind of adjusted ourselves or calibrated to that power level, and Samurais and Ninjas and whatever other job you want to play, they are maybe more obvious what direction the deck is going, and we understand the power level of those decks. And to compete with all these other things and all of these other random good piles of cards, the design team are going to have to push new archetypes and have to make something great if it's intended to be more than just a draft archetype. And I do think that the Soirees were intended to be a competitive deck, and it wasn't just some happy accident. Yeah, I think Madame Adel is an absurd card. I think Madame Adel invalidates a lot of things, because why would you ever play Layla Viking when you can have Big Layla and Big Viking, and also the Viking can't die to burn damage and stuff like that? It does seem a bit power creepy for me. I think the sentiment towards the deck is pretty much unanimous that, yeah, they tried really hard and a little bit too hard, because you don't need to be playing with 100% of your brain to play that deck 100% well.
Wow, I didn't consider that till you just said it. She costs the same as Layla. For the same price of Layla, you can turn 1. This happened to me in RVA last week. Turn 1, discard something, discard Amber, Madame Adel, Amber. So they've got 8 CP worth of cards on the field that then searched them out the next backup. And I was just like, I hadn't taken a turn yet. And I was like, what? Like, wow, that's crazy to think about.
I think that there's so much that they could have done to maybe make the deck not quite as crazy. I feel like the burn-proof thing Madame Adel does in particular is the aspect I hate. I really don't like it when decks derive some of their strength from, but wait, you forgot about this thing. You forgot that something has such and such a trait. And I swear that for all the fact that Sky Pirates is a really good deck, basically any wind deck is the inevitability deck that will win long games. I swear a not inconsiderable percentage of Sky Pirates wins are because someone forgot, I shouldn't have targeted Van, or I shouldn't have targeted a Sky Pirate because Van says I get backups, and then Balthier says those backups become a 2k buff, and now my Brynhildr doesn't do anything. And it's that forgetfulness quotient of unless you're totally on the ball, the game is going to be made harder by yourself. And I've seen it happen with Soirees as well, where people will try and deconstruct the board in the wrong order, and their stuff doesn't work.
Yeah. In particular...
That's frustrating, inelegant design for me.
Yeah. Well, in particular, and thinking about this back to Opus 14, I really don't like decks that can easily invalidate a board wipe. So, for example, you know, you put down your Shantoto, your Titan, your Susanoo, whatever. They have Amaterasu, that cancels an auto ability. Okay, frustrating as that may be, that's fair. that was one of the problems with Stern, right? Stern
Sure.
could invalidate every form of board wipe except for Shantoto, even Titan, which is a straight break. And now Madame Edel has the same thing. Oh, no. I protect, so you can break me or you can burn me out, but as long as I'm here, and that's just, if you're playing the board wipe, you're behind. So you're trying to catch back up. So you do not have the resources to, let me get rid of her first, and then I can commit the board. Like, you just don't have that because you're struggling to catch up. And Sky Pirates does that too, to a degree. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I guess the comparison for me would be like Amaterasu. Amaterasu can stop a lot of board wipes as well, and it feels absolutely awful to play a Susanoo, then lose the backup, and then you lose your Susanoo and don't get a wipe because they had Amaterasu.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is Amaterasu is not going to win a game on its own. If your deck is 50 copies of Amaterasu, you physically cannot win. Whereas if your deck was 50 copies of Madame Edel, dumb example, but the thing that is protecting your board is also making you win the game in this case.
Yeah.
And it's a card that is a lot more agile, say, than Opus 5 Y'shtola, that also can stop board wipes and also is kind of burn proof and stuff like that. But the speed of this deck and the fact that a lot of your answers are not really answers, it can get to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I was going to add on there too, with Sky Pirates, it feels bad that even when someone can drop a Shantoto, okay, well, I'm going to kites the Vaughn, so you'll get whatever else was there, but he's going to come back and they're ready to attack you immediately. And yeah, it does really bug me when these decks have really easy answers to board wipes. Again, you're trying to catch up as that player. Something else that you said in our last video, and I've kind of listened to you in a few of your videos talk about that I hadn't really considered before, but you really opened my mind to, and that was the idea of cardless advantage. Mashri is a great example of this. And I can, again, my last RVA match, I'm playing Mono Ice Discard. They have a Mashri on board. They have no hand, which should be the green light for me I can do whatever I want. And I'm thinking, even if I drop this Sidolstein, which is supposed to be Ice's big, haha, I took out your best thing, now you have no... He can cardless advantage, pull a card, just, remove 3 summons, draw a card from his deck, and I hadn't really considered that until we'd talked last time, and I thought, yeah, when you put a card in, if I put in a summon that says draw me 1 card, or Sarah Mobius that says draw me 1 card, 1, I have to commit that to my deck space. 2, I have to physically draw it, and that matters a lot, especially if you have bad luck. You have to physically draw that card and then use it. But when it's cardless, same with Dataluma Cactar, right? That doesn't actually cost you anything. You're turning a monster sideways on the board, so you really open my mind about that kind of stuff when...
To an extent, I get it, and you have to allow it, because for a card game to be interesting and for a metagame to develop, it can't just be a series of aggro decks that are, only colors apart. There has to be a control deck, and to make a control deck or something that can outlast and outvalue, basically always, there needs to be a point in games that you can do your thing more efficiently than your opponent, and you can pull something out of nothing at all, or you can do all your everythings at a reduced rate. And that is the basis of what makes a control deck. And they need to exist to have a healthy metagame, because otherwise mid-range is the only playstyle. Yeah. And if there are no good mid-range cards, then tempo is the only playstyle. And stuff like that. It's a sort of a food chain or an ecosystem or something, and these decks do need to exist. The trouble is they really seem to like some decks more than others, and I can't help but think that in the case of Kites and in the case of Mashri, there are a few tweaks that just seem like they've been a little bit pushed, and the cynic in me says, is it just to sell packs? Is it just to take the snow globe of a metagame and shake it upside down and then smash the glass while you're at it? I don't know. Sadly, I'm not privy to that kind of Hobby Japan knowledge, but the level of salt at a lot of decks, not just Soirees, going back to the sort of European sentiment here, there is a real divide in what cards are too strong and what decks are too strong in Final Fantasy at the moment. And I would be interested to see if a cultural revolution like happened back in December with Stern Leonis and Sophie and things happens. And I'm curious to see if anything happens with the watch list as well. We got Mashri and the Fat Chocobo back up and Sildra put on a watch list. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? Does it mean anything? Is it just like, gold stars in primary school or something? I don't know.
That's a great point. Well, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here is because, as I'm sure anyone noticed, if they follow your channel, you haven't put on any deck text for this opus. Normally I'm trying to catch up to you guys that, okay, here's Rudros's deck text, 3 weeks after Steve's put out all of his. But this time I've gotten to go ahead. You haven't posted any, and you posted on Twitter. One, you'd post this thing about banning Mashri, but then there was something you said in the comments where you said this was the most frustrated you had been with the game lately, and you were having more fun doing other things. And I was like, oh man, is that why you haven't posted many deck techs? Do you want to comment on that at all?
Caveat all of this by saying that last night's locals was the funniest time I've had in Final Fantasy in 3 years, 4 years, something like that. Because I think that everyone was so annoyed from the previous locals. And it's good to have competitive friends. It's good to have people that you have a sort of casual Gary Oak rivalry with. And it motivates you to take good decks and build good decks. But not everyone has got endless disposable income, and for some people paying in for locals is like their treat for the week, so it feels bad if you're going to pay in for locals and just get beaten up by Icewind Lock and Soirees and Mashery for 4 rounds. So people take good decks because they see other good decks in the room, and then more good decks happen. And Saturday's experience at locals was completely toxic. It's just constant. The game is over on turn 2, one way or another. Not even because of the aggro decks. And I've got more to say about this in a moment. Is decks that are able to play outside of their swim lane.
Okay.
But the experience was so rough that we ended up recording a really angry 60-minute rant about this needs banned and this needs banned, and tried to be as rational as to why something needs banned and why this would slow the game down in a healthy amount. And then yesterday, I think everyone they'd gotten that anger out of their system, and basically everyone took a fun deck, apart from one person who took monks. And I ended up winning this event with 1 CP Leo, the 1 CP Leo. You can only cast him if you control the sides of a D6 or something. And it was just hilarious. So there are fun cards. There are really good cards. I think that of my top 5 cards in FFTCG for fun or flavor or immersion or feeling like I'm making decisions, they've all come from Opus 15 and 16. They're really interesting. But power level is something else right now. And the power level is such that I have not felt that I can make decks that compete with those without being those.
Yeah.
If you want a Sky Pirates list, or if you want an Avalanche list or something, go and look at London's ReRaise. Lewis Barden Burnett is a genius player. He's a bit of a silent killer. I do respect him. I spent the first 6 months of knowing him thinking that he hated me, but he hates everyone, so it's okay.
Fair enough.
But yeah, his decks are so fine-tuned that you can't improve on those. You can only say, well, here's my version that's a little bit worse, and also I don't have proof because I didn't win ReRaise with it, and that kind of hurts. And I thought that there were a lot of really powerful things in this set. I love the Black Waltzes. I'll try and give you an actual number. I probably played 200 games with Black Waltzes in the run-up to London's ReRaise event, and I tried basically every colour combination that made even the slightest bit of sense. I tried the infinite loop, or semi-infinite draw loop that you can do with them. I tried sort of tempo decks and mid-rangey decks, and I tried sort of Seymour and Mashery decks with summons as well, and they felt really good, but I always felt a hair's breadth away from losing, and I thought, great, have I wasted all this time? And I ultimately did not take those to ReRaise London, but I also didn't feel like they were really good enough to release into a world where they would get locked on turn 2, and they would get Mashery back to hand and all this kind of stuff. So as interesting as a lot of things have been this set, I'm just not convinced that the power level of some of the stuff I've been building that wasn't just the big 3 or 4 meta decks was really worth sharing, because I feel bad when people trust one of my decks and sleeve them up and take them to a big event and get turned into wallpaper paste.
Yeah, that's fair. Black Waltzes were very surprising. I know I was very excited about them when they first came out. I really did enjoy playing with them. I did like a committed Fire Lightning build, and then I did one with Earth as well. So hey, because you can use Robel Akbel, and you can get all these other tools. And they were completely absent from the Florida ReRaise. And at first I wasn't sure why, but again, the room was dominated by Soirees. Well, Black Waltz 3 can't hit any of those Soirees. And even the other Black Waltzes, again, you got to take out Edel first. I think it's a really bad matchup for them.
The only sort of semi-playable stuff in Black Waltz against Soirees I felt was the VV. And the VV, again, is so cool. It's a non-curved body, it's continuous cardless advantage, it's pseudo 2CP, it's got an EX burst.
Yeah.
There is not a single bad line of text on that card, and it even takes back interesting things. I think that deck wants a Black Mage Searcher. Give us a 3CP Shantotto backup that says search for a Black Mage. If you want to be really crazy, give it an EX as well, and all of a sudden we'll be in a good place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I know I've seen a lot of NA complaints about Soirees with their EXs too, and I know Elvis feels bad. With my ice list, I actually modeled it after something you did on one of your videos you released, and you put in that Jill in the Bot backup just to shut off Elvis because it feels bad to run into him on a burst and 12,000 damage right here. Well, and you know what's funny? Last night I was playing against someone and they were playing cadets and they're playing the Opus 9 Legend Ace, and he has to see 4 cadet forwards to do 8,000 damage, and Elvis can see like 2 backups and do plus 10,000. You're like, oh my goodness.
If Elvis counted in 2000s rather than 3000s,
yeah.
I think the entire deck would be so much weaker. It's honestly amazing how much a little tweak like that would help. And yeah, it is a strong deck, and I think that the ability to just go, here's 2 8Ks that I paid basically nothing for. The burden of proof is now on you to find your win condition in time.
Yeah,
and I think that the ability to either go 2 forwards and maybe a discard off Erwin or something on turn 1, and then set up your backups, or use this super powerful Amber tool to set up backups. It's a flexible deck, and I do enjoy flexible decks, but yeah, stuff feels very free, and it's hard to set up interesting decks in the face of stuff that's free. Nevertheless, it didn't make top 8 at ReRaise. I'm not sure how the ReRaise was in America, but
it made the finals. It was a top 2 and top 4. Yeah, like I said, I think 3 or 4 of them got into top 8.
I think we had a top 16. Our day 2 was top 16, and it was a 2-deck format. And partly, I think Soirees are really easy to play in a 2-deck format because the core of the deck, nothing else cares about. You know, it's really just what is your sub-element. Do you put your Amaterasu in this deck because you're playing a higher backup anyway? And that's really like the only super common cards that are fairly unanimously in Soirees decks. But yeah, they didn't make the top 8. None of the Soiree players made the conversion from top 16 to top 8 over here. And it would be egotistical of me to say, oh, we totally solved it or something, but I think what we were playing just seemed better than the Soiree list that were being played in the UK.
Yeah.
You know? Things like the Folka list. Folka Tross is genuinely very interesting. I would be a super fan of that deck if it wasn't for Mashery just going easy mode once you reach a certain point in the game. But Folka is so strong against Avalanche and pretty strong against the Soirees as well. It's very hard to resolve a you control 4 Soirees ability when on the stack of that ability you might not be on 4 anymore by the time it resolves. So.
No, that's a really good point. You kind of mentioned something, and I really want your opinion on this. So my buddy, full disclosure, my buddy Stephen Riley, he posted something in the NA group maybe about a month ago now, maybe a little less, and basically say he's been really frustrated with the game lately in general. He's been playing a lot more Magic, and he's like, you know, FF just feels very stale because I just feel like every deck does the same thing. It craps out a bunch of forwards and then it runs in and kills you. And it was a huge thread. It got like 90 plus responses. It was really interesting to see everyone's responses. On one hand, I hear people say, no, the game's got more variety and it's better than it's ever been. And on the other hand, a lot of people agreed with him. It's like, yeah, it feels very stale. And I'm curious to know what you think about this. Mechanically, I've been thinking about it. To me, the only thing they have added since I've been playing, which is near the Opus 7, end of Opus 7, that has actually changed the way the game is played is multi-element cards. These are cards that you now can discard from a different CP from your hand. They require 2 CP to use, so you can't just slap down a 2-cost turn 1. They have these kind of weird effects of like, oh, this is actually earth and water, so it gets this benefit and it gets this benefit. But I was thinking about like counters. I didn't feel like that really changed. The damage keyword just made it more simplified. There was already effects that used damage-based stuff. And thinking
I feel like that was almost just a shorthand or something. It wasn't so much a new mechanic as it was an improvement to their templating.
Well, and thinking of crystals, at least from my point of view, I don't think crystals have like changed the way they play. So even with Robel Akbel, who's our little cover here, and as a card I love, he enters the field, you pay an effect. It's just entry the field effects. Enter the field, do a thing with a crystal. So does that really change the way the game is played? Like, to me, it hasn't, but please tell me if you see it differently.
Well, on the topic of variety, yeah, there's loads and loads of different Mashery decks. I think that part of the reason that we get this disconnect in styles, or what's a better way of phrasing this? The best thing I ever overheard someone describe Final Fantasy TCG as, I was playing a game, somebody was trying to bring one of their friends to play in locals, and they said, Final Fantasy is great, it feels like a really good sealed game of Magic, where it's primarily creature combat, very much by design, and you play your lands, and you play your creatures, and there comes a point where you outwit your opponent, whether that's a combat trick or whether it's, you outlast their aggression or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's stuck with me. I think that Final Fantasy is probably better off without Planeswalkers doing ultimates, and certainly better off without infinite loops.
Yeah.
Maybe talk about it later. And it frustrates me as such when decks like Mashery do get to exist, because they are breaking that rule. And if you look at decks like Avalanche, and particularly the Folkatros deck and Mashery decks, the signature or the vital statistics of those decks don't look like a starter deck. They don't play 23 forwards, 10 summons, and 17 backups. They are not in any way a mid-range slogfest. There is, do you achieve your condition or do you not? And I cannot imagine a starter deck or anything resembling an upgraded starter deck ever beating a sort of well-tuned Mashery pile, because the rules for that player are so different. And it's not even just about the cardless advantage, it's about the structure of the game is completely different. The one player is trying to deal 7 damage, the other one's trying to solve a Rubik's Cube, And the two USB ports no longer really add up. So I think that Hobby Japan needs to be a little bit more resolute in what direction is the game meant to go. Is it meant to be 2 mid-range fests? Is it meant to be the case that, I'm sure I've said before on videos that there seem to have been several different chapters in Final Fantasy's evolution, and I noticed things change quite a bit at the end of Opus 4. Up until then, basically decks looked like a sensible ratio of a lot of forwards, quite a lot of backups, and then Opus 5 was the sort of birth of Star Sibyl and Dadaluma Cactuar, and all of these kind of engines that self-assemble came to be, and the probability of those decks just drawing badly or having a really bad game for no apparent reason just went way down. And nothing was ever quite the same since. And then we got into YRP and into Riku Mill. And these, anytime there is a sort of alternate path or alternate win con, basically those are the best decks in the format.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's very hard to prove history and humans desiring the win in tournaments wrong on this, because it's happened so many times in history before. Is there a deck that can play by different rules? Okay, it's going to be really good.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Teleka. Do you want to mention her now, or the card that? Well, and I'll say something about Teleka really quick too. Is that when I first saw it, I think, and this is just me guessing, I think it was intended to be, you get like a minor discount, so if you end up playing 2-3 characters this turn, you went like +1 on CP. I think that's how it was intended.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. From looking at the starter decks and from looking at a lot of the cards, it is still clear to me that the game is being designed as mid-range or tempo decks playing each other, where every last little CP matters, and I don't think that it's ever been the intention for infinite loops to exist. Quite a few do, but it's a problem when they start to become viable, because again, if you can do an infinite loop and your opponent can't, you now have 2 ways to win. Maybe you win through damage, or if not, maybe you win through your opponent running out of steam and you just suddenly start playing Yu-Gi-Oh! In their face. And that's it's not fair, which sounds like a frustrated 4-year-old at a sweet shop or something, but it's just not the same game when some decks are capable of doing multiple different ways of winning and others can't. There's no reason to play the decks that can't. Teleka has facilitated infinite combos too many times. I'm glad Mayuni's gone. I'm glad Mayuni's gone for a number of reasons, but I think Mayuni died before for Teleka's sins.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, I don't want to imagine a world where you can play the Opus 16 Zidane and then Mayuni it back and then play Zidane again on turn 1, because it's already good enough to go Zidane Chocobo Zidane on turn 1 or any number of other things like that, but having a backup as well on top of that just sounds like torture. And, Bismarck is not getting any less effective over time. If you reach the stage of the game where you have 4 backups and a Bismarck and something worth bouncing, move on to the next round, because
it's over.
Wind player is not going to lose unless they have a stroke mid-game.
Well, and so on that kind of subject of the infinite loops and the wind, I think that's been a real frustration. Everyone knows I don't like wind, but I really mean it in this sense. So I play against a guy, he loves this Earth Wind list, uses Atomos, uses Teleka, it's all this, reactivation. And I do understand that is fun for the player who's using it. I get it, to get to these big combo chains, to make a card like Rosa worth it, you've got to be able to reactivate your backups. And conceptually, I am fine with that. I continue to ask for, can I, as your opponent, at least have something to do about that? can I get an ice backup or whatever that says you can't reactivate outside your active phase? So therefore now you have to come up with a plan to do something. You've got to tech in your archer or your ninja to break that, or just something, because I think that's the feeling I really don't like, is that solitaire feeling. Like you just said, your opponent just starts playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's like, all right, I guess I'll sit here and read my, play on my phone while you go off for 10 minutes. Like, can I at least just get a counter to it? And that's all I've ever really wanted, is like, give me a, something like Sid Randall is interesting, that, hey, your game plan doesn't work anymore. You have to come up with a different idea. Give me something, whereas right now it just feels like Wind freely gets to do whatever it wants, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I think that's what's so frustrating about it.
I would like to see more Amaterasu type of effects.
Yeah.
I really enjoy summons feeling powerful, and I don't really think they can print more powerful summons while Mashuri exists. Mashuri, people have said all along that the 2CP backup Yuna in Opus 1 is a big problem because it means they can never print a water summon that is too good. Mashuri makes that the case for every summon, for multiple reasons. While that card exists, there can't ever be good, cheap summons. Everything needs to cost one more than its intended price and can't be so good that you just put it in a deck without thinking. But having said that, I would like more Amaterasus because they provide opportunities to interact with the game on a much more nuanced and skill-based level. I would like to see a Lightning Amaterasu that can maybe do 7,000 damage to a forward, or cancel an action ability and minorly punish, dull all your opponent's forwards if you cancel an action ability or something. I don't know. That's probably not balanced, or it would probably be a hard cost to balance. I would like to see an Ice Amaterasu that can cancel an auto ability and your opponent discards a card. Something like that. It's not difficult to make these kind of things flavorful. And if the reason they are shying away from these things is because they're hard cards to understand for beginners, I would rather please the player base as a whole than worry about how hard a card is to read for the first time or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know why there is not more kind of counterspell or sort of interaction cards like that other than just killing permanents. And that's part of the reason that the Tilica loop deck is so good, is your stuff is so close to free that even if it gets disrupted, you're probably still coming out ahead. And so much of it you can just respond to anyway. Like, Althea is slower than it was, but that's mostly because of the threat of decks like Soirees that will beat you up before you get a chance to use it. But there are lots of ways to save your stuff and lots of ways to respond for that deck that will still make trades in CP come out in your favor, and Tilica is only ever going to help those as well. So Tilica really needs to go because it seems like a mistake in design. I don't know how I would even try and rephrase Tilica, or maybe it only gets a certain number of counters or something like that, and you have to expend a counter and tap it to reduce something. You know, not every play, every turn, or stuff like that. It is a bit of an oversight card, and I understand the sentiment behind it, but it shouldn't be allowed to exist in its current form.
Yeah, it definitely would have needed something like the next 2 characters and the next 3 characters, but not just, nope, everything you do for the rest of the round is and again,
it's an absolutely impossible task. It's like a torture in a Greek legend or something, to have to look through the entire card pool every set to think, does that form an infinite? Does that form an infinite? These things do happen, but the correct thing to do is not let them exist, I would rather there were lots and lots of bans. I would rather there were 500 bans than 0 bans, because you make things grow by pruning away the dead branches,
Yeah. Well, and tell me, I want to relate our 2 experiences right now, because over here, like I said, on one hand, I hear people tell me that the game's the best it's ever been. There's so much variety. And yet, at the same time, on the other hand, I'm seeing more players quit now than I've ever seen before. So many people I know or talk to on Discord, they've sold their collections off, and they've said, it's not fun anymore. I don't enjoy it anymore. So it's kind of weird over here to have this like conflict. Some people are like so high on it, and others like, again, it's boring. It's the same thing it's always been. I don't want to play anymore. Kind of what's the general sentiment over there? Is everyone kind of really high, in the middle, split?
Glasgow's in a good state. We've had new players recently. More players have come to us by a significant margin than have stopped in recent times. And even those that have stopped, they've kept their collection in case they're ever back in town, because maybe the community's really good. I don't know. I'm one of the sort of diehards who finds it very hard to put down altogether. So I don't know. I can't really explain the thought process of people who are quitting right now, because partly I don't know many, and partly I never would.
That's good.
I know that down in the sort of south coast of the UK as well, London's in quite a good state. Certainly Cardiff's community is huge, and there's lots of people leaving Magic to join Final Fantasy because a better experience there. So interesting, and certainly something that's not universal. I don't know what they put in the water down there to make people do it, but I think that the problem, the closest I have ever come to quitting, or the thing that made me question the decisions, is feeling like there wasn't anything I could do in games.
Yeah.
And more than any one card, it's when decks have got a particular nut draw that the game's just over on.
Yeah.
And decks that can play outside of their swim lane, I mentioned earlier on. I'll give you a couple of examples of that.
Please do.
I get that Sky Pirates is supposed to be a setup deck, and I'm almost okay with the idea of them getting some backups out and some forwards out, and now Pinello says you can draw 3 a turn, or maybe something better than that if situations arise.
Yeah.
That's okay. Control decks have to exist. The problem is you don't need to play it as a control deck. In a control mirror, you are not being adequately punished for going Van into Kite turn 1, or a couple of backups and then a really aggressive Van and then a really angry Balthier and then the Kites or something, because board wipes are too easy to play around. Sky Pirates can be a control deck one game, or it can be a tempo deck another game, and it feels like both of these are too hard to counter at once. It's not like it's a tempo deck that plays a cancel for your opponent's board wipe. It's more than that. It's a lot more than that. And I think a bigger problem with Sky Pirates as well is that you can't interact in the end of turn phase.
Yeah.
You know? The number of cards that would be so much worse if they got an Amaterasu pass. You may Amaterasu this during the end of your opponent's turn. I think maybe there's like a fundamental rule change needed here, because I get the sentiment behind there not being interaction during every single phase, because nothing good ever comes of a Magic player saying, during your upkeep before you draw, I'd like to do this, or at the end of your draw step before you start your main phase, I would like to cast this. It's always mean people who do that, and wanting to avoid that in the rules in Final Fantasy is honourable, but probably incorrect now. And the other example I guess I would give is the Icewind Lock deck. There is no doubt in my mind that that is the best deck not playing Mashery right now. It's absolutely terrifying the number of things it can beat. It has inevitability, it has got a really wide range of hate, it can do board wipes, it can break problematic big things, it can kill monsters. Who kills a monster, honestly? You're not supposed to kill monsters.
Yeah.
Cards aren't supposed to do that. What will we do without our crutch from 2018 to complain about? That deck can do a bit of everything, and again, I understand the honourable intention of having a wind setup deck that does crazy cool things with Rosa. You can maybe stack the top deck or top card of your deck and do crazy things and then cast 5. But it also worryingly works faster and faster every set.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a game I had at the most toxic locals of all time on Saturday just there, where my opponent played a backup on turn 1, and then on turn 2, discarded, played Atomos, discarded, played a 3-cost backup. That triggered the Atomos, those backups activate, that backup was Uke, flip through the deck, hits off lock, and then they discard from hand, play a 3rd backup, and tap their 2 backups to play the lock. And it's like, lock enter for 2 CP on turn 2, not leaving you with an empty hand,
right,
and me saying, I've lost my backups and a card in hand. There was just no way I could come back into that game. I cannot even conceive of a pattern of cards in deck that would allow me to come back into that. I could search for an EX and put it on top, and it still wouldn't be enough, because lock has stolen more than a turn from me.
Yeah.
And the earlier that these nut draws are allowed to happen, and the earlier that crazy stuff is allowed to happen, once more for the camera, I'm okay with high-powered decks existing, but when those decks are designed maybe to do things later on in the game, but also you're not being adequately punished for just going, here we go, turn 2. That seems like a problem. It's a deck that's operating outside of its designated zone, and it's probably the fault of more than one card.
Well said, sir. Well said. Tapping into that, and I think it goes in that idea with what my friend was saying, where he felt like all the decks do the same thing. Another friend of mine said it's all mid-range, kind of like you said. Do they need other avenues besides it's all entry the field effects, it's all on attack effects? Because when you don't expand the design space, when everything is enter, the only way to make better cards is power creep, is to, how many more win stuff can they print that says, well, reactivate even more backups? Eventually you can only activate 5. Eventually it's going to be like activate 5, use them whatever you want, and then activate the 5 again. Like, if they don't expand the design space, if they don't adequately explore mill decks or some kind of deck that, I'm trying to, how in Magic, there's like decks where like, oh, I can kind of just drain your life points. I don't never really attack you. I just like have spells and such that like naturally drain your...
I've wondered for a really long time about sort of straight-to-face burn, and for about 3 minutes I was excited when I saw the Opus 13 Legend Sophie, and I thought, oh, finally it's an alternate win con. Oh no, it's an alternate win con. Yeah, that happiness didn't last.
Well, so that right there is FF kind of stuck in this place, like you said, where it's good sealed Magic, where it's stuck in this creature mode. It's all about the forwards. Can we get out of that? Should we get out of that? Does it just make the game worse if we try? Like, how do you feel about that?
I don't really mind either way. I think that there were some interesting alternate win cards in the Chapters card pool, the TCG that they killed off to reboot as the Opus series. And there's some cool stuff like a Leo I think it was a Leo that says if you control a certain number of standard units, you just win on the spot. And that's interesting because you would have to rely on a lot of them being forwards.
Yeah.
Like, if you control 11 standard units, you just win the game. I'm plucking that number out of thin air. Not all of them can be backups, fairly obviously. So either you're playing a bunch of really bad cards that don't use the stack just so that your opponent never gets priority, or you're playing standard units where there is the opportunity for your opponent to kill stuff. But fine-tuning or balancing an alternate win con so it's not mastery levels of good, but it's actually compelling enough that it's sometimes better than mid-range slog cards, creature combat. It must be a hard job,
Yeah.
It's harder to do than us folks on the ground buying the packs think it is.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, there's a point you just made that I wanted to... Oh! So you mentioned the Leo, and then the standard units win on the spot. I've wondered that for a long time, too. Like, should we have, like, a Knights of the Round? Hey, it's 20 CP, or it's something absurd, but if you can cast it, boom, you just instantly kill your opponent. Because... like, I like the idea of Giga Graviton of the Sin, but it's so hard to pull off that it basically is invalidated. So, I don't know. That's just something I've wrestled with, too, is would that make the game more interesting? Like you said, would it just make it worse? Would it just make it feels bad? I don't know. I'm really not sure.
I'm probably the least qualified person in the world to talk about this because I've only ever completed Final Fantasy 1 and 2 and the Tactics games. I don't really know who Tifa is. I must apologize.
Yeah.
So, I'm led to believe that Final Fantasy has got some quite good lore. I know that items and stuff exist, It seems weird to me that we're 16 sets in, but we still don't have Phoenix Down or something,
Yeah.
And whether it's locations or items or stuff like that, monsters were a good step because there's so many iconic monsters, stuff like clans and all that, even people like my mum, who's not really that kind of a gamer, knows what a flan is, and it's like, wow, when you become a household name, you deserve a card. Is it the case that we need to expand maybe some more card types? Last one we got was in Opus 4. I would be okay with it, but again, it's a balancing act. What if Midgar becomes a really powerful thing because all of a sudden you've got to bring stadium destruction or something like that? Maybe this sounds a bit Smash Brothers, I'm not sure.
That's a great point. So touching on monsters really quick, because that was a new type, so it kind of changed the way the game is played. As frustrating as some of them can be, such as Atomos, I'm a big Biblos fan, and in particular, I like these 2-cost monsters that, again, they make the game interesting in the sense that they become a forward when you need them to. So they can dodge board wipes because they're not a forward at the time. They can do the surprise, haha, I'm a forward just in time to block. I'm not there for the... So I find those to be interesting. I think these have been some of the most useful monsters we've gotten. And at least where the game is right now, I think we need that. Go ahead.
Yeah, they're comfortably the best cycle of cards that's been printed in a very, very long time. And I appreciate that they do sort of enchantment type things. They are upgrading something that's within that color pie for that element. And I like that they're so powerful. I like that they dodge removal and they dodge these sorcery speed main phase 1 board wipes. But at the same time, you can't just put them in a fairly mindless aggro deck because they are not actually generating pressure on their own unless you are adequately beaten up as well. It just seems like a series of perfect card design, and Hades, who's got like all of the spare words on him for some reason. I like Hades, don't get me wrong. I think that turning dead backups into live cards, is really fun to start your turn with a Robel, take back a backup, and then at the end of the turn that dead backup into more information, and then Robel can mine it back. It feels like an engine. That's really satisfying gameplay to set up, and I don't think any one part of it is bad. I think that Jin is one of my top 5 cards in Final Fantasy in general because they finally did that thing they've been hinting at since... Opus 2, Opus 3 or something? We've got that ridiculous
Mana Servant.
Stranger Things haircut.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were thinking of Mana Servant War Mech.
Oh, that too, and then Iroha, that they were never able to get a good balance on amplifying power of things. Madison Warmek's problem was it was great that it wasn't a backup, or great that it wasn't like, part of your CP slots and stuff. It's great that it wasn't a forward, so it wasn't too easy to kill, but it could only boost one thing per turn. And Jin, I just think, is this magical alchemy of getting everything right all at once. It's kind of a threat on its own. It's a card your opponent probably can't remove all that easily unless they spend dedicated slots on it or are playing Icewind Lock.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll stop being mad about that card now. The Jin just feels like great design to me, and I do think that the good design is better than it's ever been, and I would love to showcase another of my favourite cards of Luneth, the Opus 16 Luneth.
He's great.
I find enter combat abilities really interesting, and I would love to see more of them, because a problem with enters the battlefield or sort of those kind of autos, really only Amaterasu can stop them. And it's a question I've seen a lot on the FAQ pages. If I kill the forward in response, does its ability still go off? And people are frustrated when the answer is always yes. So I think that it's almost a way of getting around that and making one-entry abilities that you can respond to is making more things that trigger when you go to combat. It gives the control players a nice boost of, yay, I've got a recurring resource every single turn. It generates interesting politics of, do I try and kill it before going to combat? It's interesting because it makes people want to play things before going to combat, when it's usually more correct to save your CP till main phase 2 and stuff. I think they are really interesting abilities for the push on bringing the action a little bit earlier, but also making resources easier to interact with, even for decks that don't play Amaterasu, And Luneth is one of my favorite cards. Luso's another example of it, but I think they got the power level wrong on Luso.
They definitely messed him up. Well, I was thinking about that too. Fundamentally, an on-attack trigger or something you got to go to combat should always be a little stronger than an entry effect, because you have to wait, right? Entry effects, their main benefit is it happens immediately. That unless they Amaterasu it, even if they kill it on the stack, you still get whatever that effect is. Whereas, hey, this forward has to attack. Hey, it's got to wait till whatever certain phase. Those are always more interesting, because the idea is like, well, you're sacrificing that immediacy for repeated value. Sometimes I feel like they don't always get the balance between that right, that there's like, well, this on-entry effect's way better than this repeated on-attack effect. But I think design-wise, that's what it should be. Although I have had a frustration lately with the on-attack triggers like Byblos, like Physalis. Look at me mentioning all these ice cards. It's weird because then when you attack, and again, I have to attack to get this benefit, and I mentioned this in my last video, and then I run into an EX burst. And, there's always that debate with people. Well, you shouldn't attack into them because they're going to hit this burst. It's like, well, I have to attack to get this trigger, so do I just sit there and not do it, to get punished by this Elvis or this Tyro? And I don't know, that's a really hard puzzle to figure out if there is an answer.
It's something that I still see question marks behind some people's eyes when I don't declare an attack with something that could attack. Mm-hmm. And knowing I will lose to an EX burst, or I will lose to a certain EX burst.
Yeah.
It's the old, do you attack with Sky Pirates when you've got a Pinello that's not really done anything yet, and your opponent might have Brynhildr in their deck?
Yeah.
Probably sensible not to attack unless you know where all their copies of Brynhildr are. Mm-hmm. But I like EX bursts, but I also think that the sheer randomness and swinginess of them is very frustrating. And the recent wave of Mashery decks, here we go again, talking about Mashery. It's frustrating to me that the Trust deck and the Fire Megissa Mashery deck as well, that's putting up incredible results in Japan. Lots of first and second place finishes at, I'll take decks more seriously if they are able to win 5 Swiss rounds or 6 Swiss rounds event rather than just a locals or something. So they are winning big enough events and surviving Swiss with crazy ratios, but the amount of bad cards they can play just because of, even if you draw your 6 EP Remora and these things that are only really useful on EXs, and particularly the case for the Fire deck, Opus 7 Ifrit and Opus 12 Ifrit, they are terrible, terrible cards. Yeah. They're not a good rate of CP. You never want to cast them. They're just there because I might EX them. That is not a sign of a healthy game to me. When you are putting cards in the deck because you're not being punished for not putting them in or you're not being punished, and you might get lucky. That's a weird mentality for me. And if you do draw them, you can still discard them for CP. you can still discard them through Braska as a conduit to use his 7K special, stuff like that. And no matter what you do, they're ending up in the right pile for Mashery to use anyway. And it's kind of clever, it's resourceful in a way, but I'm not really sure it should be applauded.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is I've been mulling this over in my head lately, and I would love to get your opinion on this, because in that thread about Mashery, and in a lot of threads I've seen this where people talk about deck building cost. The deck building cost, Stern, everyone kind of agree, well, everyone plays forward, so whereas Mashery has a deck building cost, you have to put a bunch of summons in. Soirees has a deck building cost. You have to commit Soirees. Sky Pirates has a deck building cost. You have to load it up with Sky Pirates. And on one hand, I do agree with that. And again, I like that tribal design. I like the idea that Penelo is my reward for getting a bunch of Sky Pirates. These Soirees get stronger as they all come together. So on one hand, I think that's actually good design. That's one reason I've always liked Tenzin. Tenzin is a very strong, but he says you have to play him in Samurais. You cannot jam him into a Braska's list. You can't jam him into random Mono-Fire. You have to play him in Samurais.
There's a certain amount of maths homework you need to do to make that card viable.
So I really like and applaud that. On the other hand, I question, okay, so you may have this cost of loading your deck with summons for Mashery, of loading up with Sky Pirates, and now this deck is just crazy strong. How am I trying to say this? Does that matter then? You had a cost, but you win all the games, or your deck is really hard to beat? Okay, is it really a cost at that point?
If your win rate is noticeably high, then probably the cost is not high enough. And I think you would notice a real change in Mashery if it was banish 5 summons from your break zone and you get to do the effect. And I know a lot of people have said, what if they were only once per turn? That certainly wouldn't have fixed Stern. One single instance of 4K would still be enough for Stern to be completely broken and ruin the game. I think the problem is, Mashery is not really a win con on her own, but there will come a point in most games that your forwards just don't die anymore. Once you've got 12 summons in break zone, board wipes and single target removal, and even inefficient combat trades, at any point you can say those don't happen. And it's just too easy to make that point be turn 4 in a game by playing a crazy number of summons. And I think that another part of the problem is stuff like Sildra. Sildra and Megissa, to an extent, in the 2 really dominant Mashery decks that I've seen recently. You've got a lot of ways of not being punished for only playing 8 backups, and a lot of ways of finding the forwards in this pile of chaos, And Sildra, I didn't understand that on the watch list at first. I thought, it's basically always CP disadvantage. I'm paying 4 CP and losing a card in hand to add 2 cards to hand that are worth 4 CP. You're always going down 2 CP, barring any reductions from stuff like Mashery or free casting it.
Yeah.
Why is this so unfair? But Sildra has always been used to unite unfair combos where you will very quickly make back that advantage one way or another. Whether it was finding Guido back in Opus 12 and Bart's Boko, it honestly sounds weird to say Bart's Boko right after saying Guido, because these 2 things are not really created equal.
Yeah.
But anytime there is something unfair, Doga, another prime example, Sildra will always beeline you to the most unfair thing you can do. And I think Sildra is quite limiting to the future design space of the game, because you can't ever print a combo water card again. You can't print a universally good water card ever again. Oh wait, they did. Tidus, And it's just so easy for that deck to beeline into what wins me the game here. 1 backup, Tidus. There is a clock. Your opponent will now have to do daft things to stop the Tidus.
Yeah.
And if your opponent tries to just race you for damage, that's when Folka and Mashery come in. It's too hard to win an uphill struggle when you've got Tross. That's not really... It basically says your Folka is now free once per turn, and then Mashery, every 3 Folkas, you get 1 free. It's like Costco or something.
Man, I'm so glad you mentioned Sildra. I really like that card, and I like it for the more fair things it can do. You mentioned Bart's Boko. I like that there is something that, okay, let me grab those 2 cards because they have to go together. If I draw Bart's and I never see Boko, that deck doesn't work. So I like that there's something for that. I like that Sildra can get things like Ferris for Warriors of Light. However, I also understand that it can be used to get those combo pieces, and I know people really hate it when it's reduced. You know, if you've got Yuna and Mashri and Sildra for 2, yeah, that's not, or Rydia cast it for free. So like that one I'm really torn on because I want it to exist for the more fair stuff. But you make a good point, is that, is it ever really going to be used for that, though? Is it like Tilica, where Tilica will not be used in a fair way? It will be used for the unfair stuff to do its thing.
Well, right back to caveman times. Humans are a competitive species. Yeah. Anytime there is any kind of prize on the line, or anytime there is a reward for doing things, people want to do them well. And there are so many fun things you could do with a Sildra. My favourite thing I've ever seen was somebody finding the Ject block special, the Opus 14 Ject Sildra, like on the stack of an interaction, and that was cool. But while there are unfair things to do and prizes to be won by doing unfair things, people will exploit Sildra and not do it for just exclusively fun stuff. And there isn't really an adequate way you can police that while having Sildra in format. Sildra reminds me of 2 cards that I do like. I like the 1 CP Chocomog when you're playing Moogle 11 in your deck to get any one card you're looking for, because that feels like you're playing a lot of slots just to set up that decision, and you're having to play backups and wait for them to untap like a nice, normal, well-adjusted to society person. Furthermore, I really like the Opus 12 Realm. I think it's one of the most interesting cards that has never really seen much use, and it's a gorgeous full art as well, you know? So I think that there is room for search for a special on a character you already control, because you're not going to be using that as your engine setup piece. You physically couldn't do it as your first card of a game if you have to choose a character you control and search for another card of the same name. It would be interesting and maybe revolutionary for Garland decks to have more convenient ways to loop specials. The more I talk about this, the more I'm convinced this would be a really good card to proxy and just play with as if it was legal. That's what Sildra should be. Sildra should be rewarding you for having certain kinds of interactions. But the problem is that Sildra can also set up those interactions, and that's a bit of a mistake. And it's a problem when you can go, I'll find my Sophie, I'll find my Doga, and also there's now a summon in my break zone for when I eventually find Mashri. This is all a little bit problematic and thins the deck out. And the thing that really gets me about Sildra just now, and I think is super odd, is the Twins decks. I don't know how Palomporum Twins have fared statistically in NA.
They were really prominent in Opus 15. There was one in Top Cut of ReRaise Florida. But other than that, they're not as prominent as they were in Opus ago.
I think they're about the right power level for me, because they have inevitability, and they're also kind of fast, and sometimes you win games just by going Twins turn 1, oops, my opponent didn't have an answer. But for the most part, I think that they are interesting because they reward you for pinging the right thing and blanking the right thing at the right time, you know? What I don't like is that there is a very good control deck that plays 9 backups with them in it. 9 backups, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And it's the fact that Sildra can get you Sarah, who gets you the Princess Sarah or the Edgar or whatever you want, but at the same time, all of the backups that generate crystals, all of the standard units, they are all category 5. Yeah. And it's when you can go, I'll get Sarah and Samurai, it's like, that's really, really weird. And the next time you do it, you can get Samurai and, I don't know, Oracle or something like that. And again, you're not being punished here. It's so easy to set up, and it's so easy to fuel your Mashery at the same time. I've seen this deck play like 20 summons and 9 backups, and it's just so hard to get around because of Sildra.
Yeah.
Sildra is functionally the perfect opening hand every time.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, and again, so very same thing. I've used that to help fix my fair decks where because I have a real issue with crystals personally, that I will almost always, I see the generator and I don't see the spender, or I'll see the spender, not the generator. So Sildra's a nice way, oh good, I can make sure I go grab the generator. And again, it's fun in fair decks, but I do see the issue of just like, yeah, like that's a shame. I feel the most torn on Sildra over anything, just because I like it for the fair stuff, but I'm not too proud to admit that, but it's probably never going to be used for that. It's only going to be used for this other, unfair stuff. Darn. But like you said, what does the watch list really mean anyway? I mean, they've never had a watch list before. They can ban or not ban anything at their heart's content. So
it's like your parents putting you on the naughty step or something. Like, it doesn't carry any real kind of weight. I'm sure the cards themselves don't feel sad that they are being watched.
Yeah.
If this does not actually have some kind of threat, I would love some communication on this matter. Is it the case that these cards are being actively monitored anytime they win a major tournament or a sanctioned tournament or something? I guess we kind of need more sanctioned tournaments for that to be the case. Maybe ReRaise is an enormous lab system. This is my tinfoil hat moment here, where maybe ReRaise is being used to assert the health of the game. I find it interesting, back on the Tilica topic, that the Tilica Infinite Loop made the finals of UK's ReRaise. That's quite a scary indictment, and it went undefeated in Swiss, so can't be that bad.
Oh, man. So speaking of tournaments, I'll kind of shift gears here because I want your opinion on this too. I've seen people say sometimes, so like Soirees, for example. Soirees has made the top cut of everything over here since it's come out, and usually in multiple forms. However, it hasn't technically won anything yet. It hasn't been the top deck. But for me, I'm like, yeah, but it was still half the top 16. It was in the finals over here. Like, it was in the quarterfinals of something. Like, just because it didn't get the win that day, I don't think that should matter. And as a matter of fact, on the most recent RVA podcast, they were talking about the winner of the Florida ReRaise. I think his name was Daniel. And he was playing Fire Ice kind of aggro, Fire Ice aggro, night stuff.
Back up. Slightly Knights, slightly Squall,
some kind of build there. And it was funny because he ended up beating Soirees in the finals, and he beat it in the quarterfinals, semifinals, whatever. But the night before, he revealed that he tested against it and lost 10 games in a row. Like, he couldn't beat it. So he's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get stopped by this thing. Well, turns out the Heart of the Cards is with him that day, or whatever you want to call that, and he beats it. So to me, as long as it makes the top cut, I think that's all that matters. Or how do you feel? Or do you think, no, it has to win to prove that it's like, the top banana or whatever?
Elvis Presley. I think there was an album of his back in the 50s called 50 Million Elvis Fans Can't Be Wrong. And I use that as my metaphor for statistical analysis.
Yeah.
If lots and lots of people are doing it, you've got to appeal to the many here, and I think that if lots of people think something is broken, it doesn't really matter if the best person in the world doesn't think it's broken, And I think also that there is a certain sort of herd mentality. How many are you expecting to see in top cut, Generally speaking, the 50 million Elvis fans here, the 16 people in top cut are probably more right than they are wrong. So if they think a particular deck is good, or it's being heavily represented at the top of Swiss, it's probably good, It's quite rare that someone will get lucky 8 games in a row.
Yeah, that's true.
My personal metric is I will take any tournament with no top cut and less than 5 rounds of Swiss with a pinch of salt, because you might get you might get lucky 4 games in a row. But if you've got 5 rounds of Swiss and, it's a top 4 or something, I like to run my tournaments with 1 more Swiss round than is strictly necessary, or have a bit of a top cut for best of 3s to whittle things down, just because I'm a massive stats nerd. Yeah. I love knowing what does well, and I love knowing patterns and things like that, and it's entirely possible my whole locals hates me for it because I make them do all this homework at the weekend. But it's interesting to me to see what does consistently make it to the top, and my metric is I will take any tournament with more than 32 players very, very seriously, because that's when you're into 6 rounds of Swiss, probably a top cut, but even if not, it takes a certain amount of good decisions and a good deck to go 4-2 at a tournament like that.
Yeah. Awesome. I appreciate that insight. Do you, and this will be really relevant for you guys because you did this for your UK ReRaise, but I've seen a lot of debate. How would you feel about making the Swiss rounds best of 2 or best of 3 just as a standard? The idea, obviously, hoping to eliminate that, oh man, I just had a terrible draw, I didn't see anything, so now I lose this round. And you guys kind of did a weird best of 2, right? Or you did 2 deck, but you played 1 deck for the first 4 and then the second deck for the last?
That was exactly it. Yeah, the first 4 rounds of Swiss were with your deck A, and you had to say which one was deck A and deck B on the deck list as you signed up.
Okay.
The next 4 rounds of Swiss were exclusively deck B. And then for top cut, it's a traditional best of 3 where you see your opponent's 2 deck lists, you roll for who's going to go first, and then you decide which order makes more sense for you. The objective being to win with both decks.
Yeah.
If you win a game, you can't play with that deck again for the next games of the best of 3. If you lose, you may swap deck for game 2. Basically, that's it.
Yeah.
I like that format. I think in an ideal world, we would play best of 101s and sit there for weeks and weeks at a time until we've found a real good statistical thing here, or would enter simulation mode like in Demolition Man or something and just, mentally play the game a ton of times over. So, there has to be a six compromise here, because venue lease is a thing, and people have
Sure.
got lives they want to get on with. And I think that the card market, I don't know how card market are in the US, but they're like TCG Player, big secondary market, sort of publicly owned like eBay or something.
Yeah.
They put on a series of events pre-COVID, and their events had best of 3 Swiss, and they were generally well received. So I think that if you can make the time in your schedule for that, best of 3 Swiss, it just smooths out statistical variance.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's what was I going to say? I had a little follow-up to that, but I can't even remember what it was now. I do like the 2-deck. I really enjoyed that, the Last Worlds. It was fun to see it on your guys' stream, too. It kind of prevents anyone who's got like a one-trick pony deck. All right, but you got to beat me with this second one. And it can make interesting decisions, too. Like you said, if you are sharing the element of fire, okay, well, which deck do you put your Amaterasu in? Do you split it up amongst both? So
Sure, yeah. And I think that there are better times to have a 2-deck format. I think that Soirees, certainly in my case for ReRaise, I took Soirees because why would I not take Soirees? The deck's crazy. And that was wrong. The deck was not crazy enough for that room, and I think it was expected to be the most common archetype in the room, and people who were testing against Soirees basically had it figured out. I felt like a couple of my games were uphill, a couple of my games were mirror matches with that deck. I dislike mirrors on principle because it feels like there's slightly more of an element of who opens well.
yeah,
I think in my round 6 of Swiss, I opened kind of poorly, they opened kind of well, and the first 2 damage I dealt were both Amber EX, and it's like,
yeah,
oh, great, okay, sure. Not too salty, call it a learning experience. Don't play that deck.
yeah, right.
Well, I was proud of my first deck. I was top of Swiss at the lunch break. I'd gone 4-0. I'd beaten 4 setup Bismarck decks with a kind of a control mono fire or whatever. Basically, I love Luneth, like I said earlier on. I thought Luneth was crazy. I like the idea of they kill your Luneth as you're going to combat, so you Phoenix it back in before you go to combat.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
I was wondering what you played, because I saw your Ice Earth Soiree thing on stream, but yeah, I didn't get to know what your other deck was.
Mono fire, very standard mono fire. No Mashery, no Megessa, nothing like that. I called it semi-rise. It was like Samurais, but with the Samurais taken out. I have no problem with Tenzin.
Nice.
I'm sure he's a lovely person, but I just don't like that he makes you play 20 Samurais to have a reasonably convincing hit rate. And I'm all about the maths. I'm all about knowing that Tenzin will hit something 95% of the time. And I'd like the standard unit Samurai as well that checks. Are there 7 Samurais in Break Zone? But having 7 Samurais in Break Zone gets harder and harder every set because there's always some graveyard interaction like Soirees that makes people want to play Mist Dragon and things like that. So, and also the speed of the format was a bit of a concern for me. So, the minute you start looking at things like Hien and Gosetsu and even Iroha now that Jin exists, I just felt bad playing those in a deck. But I did love Cyan. I love Cyan as a backup searcher. So, the deck was semi-Samurais or semi-Rise, 3 Cyan, 7 Samurai backups, and the rest of it was just every good fire card ever. And I feel like there's quite a lot of them. 2018 me would be very surprised.
Semi-Rise, that's a great name. Do you guys get do you get the deck lists before you play your Swiss rounds, or is that only in Top Cut? Do you think that's something they should add? Because a lot of people have said that, over here in NA, and you'll have people scouting each other at tables. Oh, what's he playing? It's like, you could eliminate all that if you just carried your deck list with you, handed it to your opponent, and just said, hey, here's what
I'm kind of always going to do that. And I think that everyone who's a scary London player or something, their deck would have been known by the whole room by the end of round 2. You don't keep secrets very long in a cramped village hall. So, yeah, I think that knowing your opponent's deck list up front would be okay. Some cards behave very differently in a known deck list format, though. Things like Belias, or even Matthias the Corrupt, the 1 CP Ice Summon. Ordinarily, I don't think it's very good. It was pretty good in the turbo discard days because of the speed of those games and the terrible forwards you were playing that couldn't ever win combats on their own. But that card behaves very differently in a deck lists are known sort of format. And the same for Chris Matisky taught me that the 2 CP Shiva that dulls 2 forwards, that sneaks lethals quite like nothing else. And so when deck lists are known, people will respect that 1 copy for a very, very long time. So I do think that the politics are difficult of a deck list known format, and it's not quite a straight comparison. I would be interested to see how it goes. Surprise value is already something I undervalue. I don't like playing things just because they're different, because I know how good the solved meta is.
Well, so expounding on that, what's the difference between that and Top Cut? Like, why should Top Cut get to see that? What makes that, okay, this is allowed to see your opponent's deck, whereas the other one isn't? Because to me, it's all, well, you're playing a game of FFTCG throughout it, right? So can you elaborate on like the difference between those two?
I wonder if it's as simple as logistics of it being quite hard to do for a 100-person Swiss is giving everyone the right deck list and making sure nobody gets a coffee stain on them between rounds or something.
That's fair.
I think there's maybe an element of chess, and it reduces some of the randomness in Top Cut as well. I really enjoyed the decision process of a 2-deck format where you know your opponent's 2 deck lists and you know who's won the toss, and then you're locking in with a particular deck.
Yeah.
And I'm quite sure that in the UK ReRaise finals between Jackie Hayden, who had Avalanche, and
the mill list, right? Or the loop, not mill, lip. Well, I guess I guess it's kind of mill.
Sort of mill. Exile mill, yeah. And Lewis had got Sky Pirates and Avalanche. And I believe Lewis opened with Avalanche. But everyone was saying he shouldn't have, because Avalanche was the deck that could beat either of Jackie's decks, or had the potential to. And just going by statistics and matchups, it was a lot harder for Sky Pirates to win in time against the mill list. And it's very hard, flat out, for Sky Pirates to beat Avalanche. So people were saying, you know, knowing what those 2 decks were, he should maybe have opened the other way to get 2 shots with Sky Pirates and maybe lock out one of Jackie's decks and stuff like that. So I do enjoy the sort of high-level thinking. And to be honest, I don't think everyone would think like that. Top Cut players or finalist levels of players will probably think like that and have some strategy to the order in which decks go out.
Yeah.
But the people who are there for fun, I don't fault them. They are the lifeblood of the community. I don't think as many people would necessarily care.
Yeah.
Maybe that's it.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I definitely have... I've thought of that casual attitude too, of like, well, you got to win with both regardless. So what does it matter what order you play them in? You know, you have to get 2 wins out of it. But that's really interesting to consider. I like that.
A couple of my games, certainly when I've done 2-deck formats, I will pick a different deck depending on whether I'm going first or second. And one of my favorite moments of FFTCG in general was the 2018 World Championships, when it was a 3-deck format. You didn't have to win with each of your decks. Rather, both players had to swap deck every game.
Oh, interesting. So you could never do the same one twice.
I might be doing someone a disservice here, but I think it was Hunter Nance, NA player, had got a really weird Ice Earth list with the back attack Carbuncle in it. The 2CP backup that you can play during your opponent's turn. And the intention was, always play that in the games where you know you're going to be going second. Yeah. Because so many of the important backups in that deck were 3 cost that it effectively allowed you to steal going first.
Yeah.
And little things like that I really love, but it will only work in very controlled circumstances in a multiple deck format where you know there's, you know, games that you might want to strategically go second or be forced to go second. I just thought that was a really interesting sort of elevated IQ way of playing that has resonated with me.
Oh, that's great.
The Highlander side event, that was hysterical.
Yeah, okay, so tell me about that. Okay, so you guys did this thing called the Highlander side event, and correct me if I'm quoting the rules incorrectly, you could only have one of every type of card, is that what it was? Or every card itself?
Only one copy of a particular card. So if a card is in your deck, it's modelled after Highlander in Magic, or, you know, there can only be one, the tagline from Highlander the film, that's where we get it from. So, it was the side event for ReRaise as well. I loved it, to be honest. I went in thinking I would detest it. I built a deck mostly out of spite. Arguably, I spent more time on that deck than I did on my Soiree's deck, and maybe that's why I ended up on, you know, the 17th on the bubble slot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting. Very good for just a funny day 2 event, and I would encourage any major events to give that a try. You had to pair up with someone. Originally, there was a rule of your 2 decks have to be unique with each other. You know, between you, it's 100 unique cards, but I think the logistics behind that were too difficult. So I ended up playing a really funny list here. I still have it. I don't know if maybe I should stick an image in the chat or something here, but I've still got the list.
Put it in the link, with the video.
It started out as a bit of a joke, and Opus 13 Legend Sophie that's been restricted.
Yeah.
Technically, she's not restricted in Highlander, you know? It's if everything is at 1 copy, then Sophie's just as likely to show up as anything else. And then that kind of got me thinking about things in Earth Watercolors, and Sarah and Claris and Norshdalen all seem really powerful. And if you play one of each of those, then it feels like you've got a play set of Sarah like you would in a constructed deck. So it was just sort of a really fun mishmash setup of absolutely everything. And it just reminded me of the good old days when games were a little bit slower and decks got all of their things back together. A couple of really funny memories, and it's things like this that keep me going back to events. As fun as winning or trying to win is, and solving formats and things like that, you wouldn't do it if it wasn't for the laughs, and the endorphins you get one way or another. And if you can't get them from beating Soiree decks, then you try and get them from somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's just an opportunity in a slower format where everyone is going to get their nut draw that much less. An opportunity for slower cards to shine, and the Opus 16 Fasoya that does more things the more colors you pay towards him.
Yeah,
it's such a fun card.
That's a cool card.
I really want to spend the dying days of Opus 16 messing about with stuff of it, because I think I've had my fill of the meta decks. I'm sort of just ready to start spoiler season and think towards the future. And it's cards like Fasoya that just appeal to the big kid inside me, because they do crazy things and they reward you for having crazy decks. And I really enjoy the sort of cycle of Muggles in Opus 9 and Opus 10 as well. That can tap for
likewise.
Colors. It just seems like a sort of payload for them as well. We deserve a Moogle deck,
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Well, and I really enjoy those decks that kind of have a reward, but you've got to earn it. You did a little meta recap. I think it was like a month in or whatever, and I was inspired by that, so I also did my own one just recently, 2 months in, and I mentioned Lael, the new Lael forward that says everyone's got to block, everyone's got to attack. He's actually a pretty interesting card. I had a buddy who used him with Squall, where he puts down his Lael, here comes Squall, they now have to block the Squall, and but I said in that very video, I said, but you have to work for it. You've got to set up a situation and a deck that gets you that payoff. I was like, or you can just play Soirees and they'll do whatever you want. So I agree. I like those kind of payoff ones. But before I forget, because you mentioned her, last time we spoke, you said you were kind of hesitant on the idea of limiting cards because you didn't want the feels bad of, oh, your copy of Sophie hit into damage, but mine didn't. Now that she's been limited, do you feel any differently? Because at least in my experience, like when she comes out, she's still Sophie and she's still obnoxious, but I do see her way less. So has that changed your opinion on it at all, or are you still just kind of, how do you feel?
Well, I've played a lot of monks, and I know that the mentality behind playing monks has had to change.
Yeah.
You used to basically use all your searchers to get Ursula because she was the real powerhouse of the deck, and you would mostly just wait until a Sophie showed up in your hand. But when there is only one copy of Sophie, the odds are relatively high that you will go a long time without seeing one. And now having to use a mat search, or if you still play Tyro, a Tyro search, Kolka and things as well, the order in which you bring that deck out has had to change, and I think that alters the speed of it. And the slower Ursula is in hitting the field, the chances are higher your opponent will have a board wipe and obligate you to do your sacrifice stuff, or they might have the Amaterasu and things like that. So definitely it did affect the deck's power level more than I thought it would, because FFTCG is so full of searches.
Yeah.
There are more cards that search for whatever card you want in FFTCG than like the entirety of Magic the Gathering's history. Their searches are very limited to stop infinite loops, or, I win on the spot kind of a thing. So I think that the Sophie restriction did help. But by the same token, there's games that I have no way of winning that I win by accident because I top decked a Montleonis who gets me the Ursula, who gets me the Sophie, and then I've got, an Aerith that comes back from removed from game pile, and all of a sudden I win on the spot. And I don't feel good when that happens. I don't know how much of that is just every deck can now top deck something that good, and every deck, you're only ever 2 cards away from winning the game. And there was one ego move that one of our players did back in Opus 3 or something, and it was teaching a new player how to play and let this player draw 3 cards a turn.
Yeah.
It was just like, you can draw 3 a turn, I'll draw 2, and I'll still beat you. And he did, because he was a very good player. And I feel like that is just impossible now. You couldn't even do that as a flex now. I wouldn't put money on those kind of games. And it's mostly because of things like Sophie and 8CP lock and Mashery, I'll say it again, turn it into a drinking game. It's the speed of the game is such that you have to know what you're looking for in your fun.
Yeah. I've noticed that a lot with Ice Discard, as that's a deck I've enjoyed piloting for 15 and 16, is that in the past, getting someone to 0 was a lot more punishing, but now my opponents way easier for them to just top deck 2 cards. Oh, look at that. And I can play them and they give me some value. I'm like, it's always a moment of me. I was like, well, I can't get you any lower than 0. So if you could pull something off 0, then I guess just, good job. You did it. Cause
I remember back in Opus 8, look, I played quite a bit of Ice, sort of Opus 5, 6, 7 times. I just didn't like YRP, and I didn't like that of the Macactoire, and I thought that maybe really aggressive Ice would be a good way to play those. I'm not saying I liked Turbo Discard. I was more of a fair Ice player. I'll set up my plans, I'll play an Allstein, and feel like I earned that win. But in Opus 8, I was like, they printed Scale Toad. Oh my goodness, I cannot believe this thing. Ice is now tier 0. Something needs banned. And then I was flicking through the rest of the set until I hit Luminous Puma. And then I was like, yeah, no, Ice is dead. Ice is dead. The way that you can now just instant speed, install a Luminous, get back a good card, and then you can never really play a Sid Allstein ever again because you've got ways of adding cards to your hand at instant speed without something daft like scholaring a thing back to hand, which often felt as good as an Allstein anyway. So, I think that Ice has had a harder and harder time, and Scale Toad even interacts quite unfavorably with end of turn draw effects.
Oh, it's
because
terrible.
Of the way that the turns resolve.
I did it against the Sky Pirates, and they had Bismarck, and they literally go to 0. Scale Toad goes on top. Up, their hand's good, no discard, and Bismarck says, "Yep, bounce and draw a card." It's like, that's not fair.
Lakshmi as well. There are so many end of turn draw triggers. Tenzen as well. I felt like Ice was in a terrible, terrible state from Opus 11 through to 14 or something like that. And now I'm not sure how I would build Mono Ice, or I'm not sure why I would build Mono Ice, mostly because I know how tough the competition is. But I really enjoy Ice Earth at the moment, mostly because of the other Sophie, the new Sophie's one of my favorite cards ever printed. Again, so many of my favorites are Opus 15 and 16.
Yeah.
And it's how many problems for Ice that elegantly solves. You want to be playing big things, you struggle to remove active things, you struggle to remove 4 costs, you struggle to remove in general because Ice doesn't deserve summons. And Sophie just says, yeah, you know what, I will synergize with all of that and solve all of your problems. And that to me is just really good design, Super fair, but rewards you for things you kind of want to be doing anyway in a non-oppressive manner. Why can't every card just be Sophie?
Well, and I'll call out, talking about cards we love, I love Lasswell, and yes, it was my spoiler, so I'm kind of biased because I got to see it before, but I remember the moment, thank you, I remember the moment I got it, I was just like, this seems really good, and the more I play with it, the more I use it, it's one of those cards that's it's worded the right way, because they could have worded it in some weird way. If you control so many knights, if a knight of a different color, it just says, nope, if he enters, you get your dull freeze. If any knight enters, you get your dull. And if any knight attacks, you get the discard. Doesn't have to be him, doesn't have to be. So I've had so many variants with knights alone. I've done water, fire, splash in the Lasswell, fire, ice, Lasswell. Earth, ice, knights, where legit you can play goofy cards like Brandalus, dull freeze. Oh, by the way, when I put Pelennor down on the backup line, also dull freeze. Like it's worded in the right way that it gives you this variety, which I really like. And that was one of the things I liked about the Black Waltzes too, whether it was the White Mage discard, the Earth version. I really enjoy those that let you branch out into a lot of options, and maybe that's like one of the parts that soirees can't, soirees just want to jam in all the soirees, whereas these ones give you no, you can be really creative with this. You can come up with a lot of different ideas.
Yeah, I think that Lasswell's interesting as well, because it's the kind of card, like Lunith I mentioned, that generates sub-games of politics. Do you kill the Lasswell before end of turn just to maybe get rid of the discard at end of turn trigger, or are they just going to play another Lasswell and now you're going to feel multiple steps behind? That to me is really good design. Yeah. I think nowadays my favorite card in the entire game is Robel Akbel, because it's just a bit of everything. It's tremendous value, but you have to have certain deck building costs to do so. Mm-hmm. It's infinite value, but not in a fresh information kind of way. Yeah. Like if there's backups in your break zone, surely they weren't that useful to you anyway. You've already discarded them for CP or cracked them because they've done their thing. And it's really interesting that Robel can still make that feel like a good thing to draw a dead card every single turn, because then you can channel it into Yunalesca, or you can, discard it into Lail or whatever. It's just a super compelling design for me. And I would like to see more cards like that they have dependencies, but they're also a little bit self-sufficient. And there's some games where I've played a Robel on turn 1 because he'll deal 2 damage before my opponent can affordably kill it.
Yeah. I really enjoy design that kind of respects your opponent, because it's very easy to make cards that are fun for the person playing them. Hey, look at all the fun things I get to do, while your opponent sits there, just crying. So I like cards. I really like 2 CP 5k bodies like Lasswell, where he's immediately good for me. He'll give me continued value, but he's really easy for my opponent to deal with. A Blaze, Brynhildr, any of the 2 cost breakers, like not a big deal to get rid of. And another example of that is back in the day, I don't really feel like it's so much this way, but like when I first started, I really enjoyed playing against Lightning because it was tricky, but I knew what it could do. Okay, it wants to target my active forwards, so if they're dull, they're safe from those spots. It can dull my guys anyway, so it made it for me very interesting. Do I attack? Do I have to worry about the shoal, the haste coming out to counter me? Like, oh, if they're dull, I know he can't zap me with anything right now. Like, it was interesting. I always found it like a rewarding challenge to play against Opus 8, Opus 9 Lightning, because again, it was like, okay, it's tough, but I know how to fight it, and I know da-da-da-da. Like, I really enjoyed Scions against that matchup, because since they all had haste, they immediately go dull. It's like, all right, well, you can't zap me with anything because they're not active. So that was an example of something I really enjoyed playing against it.
I do kind of miss those days, yeah. And I remembered last time I spoke to you, we were talking about how the design philosophy of Lightning has been lost, and I'm disappointed to say I don't think an awful lot has changed in between times.
I don't think so either.
There's just so few Lightning cards that do simple stuff,
What were their legends this set? Like, I can't even think of... it was the Black Waltz, and then what was the other one? It was something... I can't remember what the other legend was.
FFTCG, Savior of Mankind. Let's see.
I remember Lady Lilith from last set and Black Waltz here, but I can't even think of what the other Lightning legend was. I know Nyx was last set.
Y'shtola, there we go.
Oh, that's why, yeah.
That is your problem right there. In the last set, we got Y'shtola, a tribal card, and Black Waltz, a tribal card. The set before that, we got Nyx, a tribal card, and Lady Lilith, kind of tribal.
A crystal card, yeah.
Yeah, and another problem as well. I'm glad you touched on it with Lasswell being easy to deal with. Something that came up in the YYT's post-locals discussion recently was Brynhildr as a card. Brynhildr, while kind of fair, is very limiting to design space as well, because you can't ever really print 5k or less utility forwards and expect them to succeed ever again.
Luso.
And, well, yeah. What are the solutions there? Do you ban Brynhildr just so that small things can exist again?
Yeah.
Or do you power creep the game so that everything from now on is going to be 6k or above? 6k is the new small number.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I really like either of these ideas, but Brynhildr is just so free, So
efficient. No, that's a really good... I think I saw that you made a similar comment on the Twitter thread, and I really like that too. Because, yeah, like you said, on its own, I think Brynhildr is fine. But like you said, well, it probably forced them to do things like Rydia. Well, we got to give her this protection, because otherwise people just blast her out of the way, and then she'll never stay around to generate these counters. And like, she's the one I talked about with Alex too, where if she spent the counters, she probably would feel awful. But at the same time, the fact that she keeps them also feels kind of off. So it's like, I don't know, it's a really weird balancing act.
Yeah, like, I have enjoyed playing with and playing against big setup Rydia decks that go, play a bunch of things, and then I'll get into a loop of 7 CP Phoenix and stuff like that. That genuinely felt entertaining to play. It was a balancing act to get the 3 colors right and the ratios right. And there's also the risk of drawing your 7 CP Phoenix before your Rydia is live, and then you've got a totally dead card. But that's not the way it's being exploited, because it's so much easier to play the Turbo Rydia list that's more popular in Japan. We've got one person who's a big fan of it in the YYT, and you just play all of the cheap summons, because Rydia will let you cast one of them per turn for free anyway. Moogle and poo-poo your way into surprise, surprise mashery.
Yeah. I want to ask you
Is
about...
that Rydia's fault? I don't know.
Yeah. I want to ask you about... What are Kingsglaives like over there? Because Kingsglaives are kind of weird to me, because they basically were mostly ignored last set because they just weren't very good. And the only real new thing they've gotten is this Noctis. I'm personally in the boat that I think they're very overrated. Like, I don't think that Noctis single-handedly, this is a tier 1 deck all of a sudden. I think it's definitely better, and I have seen its potential, but like... And over here, it seems very like, some people are like, yeah, I still think it kind of sucks. And other people are like, dude, it's one of the best decks in the game. Like, it's amazing. What are they doing like over there?
With absolute certainty, I can tell you that Kingsglaives are purple.
Well, you got me there. Yeah, I can't deny that one.
I lost my first 3 or 4 games to Kingsglaives in Opus 15, and I was like, wow, Nyx is really hard to kill, and it's quite scary when a Regis comes out and resurrects a bunch of stuff. And then I saw, like, Go-Go in Glaives so that you could copy Nyx's ability, and I was like, this is phenomenal. And then I don't think I lost to it again for the rest of the set. And the exact same happened in Opus 16 when they got Noctis added to the deck.
Yeah.
I lost my first 3 or 4, and I thought, this is really tough. I couldn't actually beat the deck. I could only ever try and melee out because Noctis made it so easy for them to ignore my combat step.
Yeah.
I had to, it was when I was playing sort of discard ice actually, and basically ice and earth have got no really good summons that can kill the Nyx.
Yeah.
It's all ability stuff. The Nyx was basically going to go uncontested all game long. Every game turned into mill. I just had to try and stay alive, try and wipe the board as best as I could, time a good Shantato. And then I kind of reached this breaking point where I couldn't lose to the deck anymore. So I feel like the surprise value of Glaives is quite high. I think that they're good at sneaking lethals and they're good at dulling stuff down, but they put that text on a lot of lightning cards these days, you know?
Yeah.
Noctis is phenomenal. It's a good sign, or a sign of a powerful card. Maybe not a good sign, but a sign of a powerful card when costs can be reduced to 0.
Yeah.
Because Waff was dominant in Opus 10 because Rain could go to 0, and it's something I'll always look out for on any kind of reduction card is there something big that can be played for 0? The most interesting Glaives list I've seen is sort of aggressive, sort of combo-ish, but is also a Sophie deck, because it feels absolutely awesome to play the new 2CP Sophie, and then Noctis for free but still kill something.
Yeah.
And then, Libertus, who sometimes feels like he only costs you 1 CP, but still triggers Sophie. That deck is interesting. Again, I'm going to use the big room argument here and say it was represented in London. Lots of copies were in London. Some of those copies made top 16. None of them made top 8.
Yeah.
And it's all fine and well saying I don't think that deck is good, but it's harder to argue with statistics.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah, one of my friends said, I think Nyx is one of the best blockers in the game, but blocking doesn't really win you the game. So yeah, I guess take
That's
that for
exactly it. Equally, Nyx is good at attacking because for however many cards are in your break zone, you can just become 11k.
Yeah.
And if it is adequately punishing for your opponent to block, they won't. So
Yeah.
it's quite easy for that deck to get a big board. But the problem is Lightning has got no way to protect its investments really outside of Nyx. Lightning still has absolutely nothing it can do to board wipes. The only thing you can maybe do some of the time is pump Nyx out of range of a particular piece of removal, and then Nyx again to get a Regis to try and get stuff back, but that doesn't stop the Shantato. It just feels like there are some holes in Lightning's stuff that need addressed,
Yep.
Ravana as well is a very interesting card that I have never do it intended purpose. A lot of the time I've thought, oh, that's going to be hard to kill, and then a top deck Typhon,
Yeah, exactly. Oops. I want to ask you about product really quick, because I just got kind of curious your perspective, because you've played a lot of other trading card games too. So for me, usually what I will do is, I know you guys get a lot of boxes because I always see the unboxings you do. Usually I'll just buy 2 boxes. And that's more than enough to get me, multiple copies of commons, rares. And so really the only thing I'm usually missing is maybe some heroes and maybe some legends. If I'm lucky enough, I'll at least get one of every legend, if I want a full play set of one of them. But it's kind of weird after that, because to me, there isn't much incentive to buy a single pack at that point, because I'm only looking for 2 cards, which is what, everyone immediately they go to the foil and what's behind the foil. And so the rest of it's basically just fodder. But I can't imagine that's exclusive to Final Fantasy. Surely other because that's the nature of it, right? You're buying a random pack of cards and you're seeing what you can get. Is there any way to improve upon that, to do so? I don't know, because it just feels kind of weird. Well, I got my 2 boxes, so there's not really a reason to buy more packs other than to cross my fingers and hope I get that thing they want. Do other games do anything differently? Sorry, go ahead.
Honestly, not really. I think that Final Fantasy is the only game that I am emotionally invested enough in that I actually buy boxes. Almost anything else, almost any other game, it is more time and cost effective to buy singles. Let somebody else have the burden of putting 50,000 commons in the bin after they've opened their packs and stuff like that. So, it's the only game that I still regularly buy boxes for. I am a bit of a foil hound, it must be said. I really like a deck. I try and foil it out. I try and max rarity everything, triple sleeve it in very fancy sleeves. and then get beaten up anyway. So yeah, it's maybe a bit more of an incentive to buy stuff, and I find sort of case mapping interesting. There's now, I think, at least 3 different patterns a case can be in, so it's not as easy to just buy a case, keep the box that's got the full art cloud in it, and then sell the rest. Pretend they're unknowns. I don't know if there's anything really that I do. I try and give away playsets of commons and rares and stuff, and I try and build some budget type of decks if people are looking for something for as an intro kit.
Sure. As
interesting as Final Fantasy starter decks are, I like it when my starter decks actually look like an archetype. And something that's done in Magic is challenger decks. This idea of they almost resemble a tournament archetype. Whether it's a control deck with an instant win finish or something, and you'll get one of each of the key cards and some stuff that will buy you time. They are good design. I thought that Final Fantasy have picked up their game when you get the 2 starter decks at once. The Cloud versus Sephiroth and Turks versus
Avalanche.
Broken cards.
That one. Man, if I'm lucky enough to get on stream at Omaha ReRaise, I'm going to look like a total scrub because I do not foil my stuff out at all. I feel like my foils always kind of bend a little, so I'm like, I'll just go with the plain ones. But I know that's a big thing. People love the foil ones. Okay, so you brought up a great point that I have to ask you on. You just said FF is the only one you're emotionally invested in. But you said yourself you've only played like 3 of the games. So why do you love FF so much? What makes this card game worth investing into over others?
Yeah, sure.
Because I've heard several people say that. Well, FF is the best game. I'm just curious. Okay, but what makes it the best game? Especially if you're not as invested in the IP.
It's the best game because I feel like randomness comes least into it. The real reason I stay is community. If Final Fantasy was a brilliantly designed game but had got a toxic community like I've experienced in some games in the past, I wouldn't still be here, and I would be surprised if many people were. But the generosity and whatnot, I don't know if maybe the subject matter of Final Fantasy being games that were big in the 90s, a lot of Final Fantasy eminent titles are now decades behind. I don't know if that just attracts a more mature audience and well-adjusted adults instead of 15-year-olds who don't know how to wash. It's a refreshing change in game stores, when I've got my cologne covered friends. So I think part of it is community and the sort of sense that comes with that. But from a game perspective, it's reduced randomness for me.
Yeah.
A cynic might say that randomness has reduced too much, and now you see turn 2 lock all too often and things like that. But the deck size and drawing 2 per turn and the searching, it feels like there are so many opportunities for you to have scale over the flow of the game and exert influence over the way the game is going to go. If you want to play aggressively and play out your whole hand on turn 1, no one's going to stop you. Whereas in Magic, the rules say otherwise, It's not that Magic is a simple game, and that there are unintuitive and very clever things happening in every game of Magic across the globe right now. But I don't like it when I have to mulligan down. In Magic, you mulligan down in hand size. Anytime you want to take a mulligan, your next hand is 1 card less and 1 card less. And sometimes you just won't see a land, and that'll lead to a smaller hand where you don't have land and don't have land. And they've taken steps multiple times to address this and changed the mulligan rule, and I think a lot of that is down to game design and seeing lands and when do you see lands. And I think that the randomness balance of Final Fantasy in its good high points is just about perfect, and that's what I like about the game and why I stick with it through thick and thin, is because it feels amazing to know that you won because of you, not because your deck was foilier than your opponent.
Yeah, you said that perfectly. I've played some Magic the Gathering Arena online, and on one hand, I kind of appreciate lands that like you can drop them, immediately dull them, or tap them, I guess they would call in that game, for CP or whatever. But then, on the other hand, like you said, sometimes if you don't see them, it does feel bad. Well, I've got a bunch of cards in hand, but I don't have the mana, the lands to use them. So
Robel and Crystal comparison all over again. It introduces a layer of dependency between the substrate and the filtrate or something. It's H plus 2O. H2 plus O.
I love that comparison. That's really good. What was I going to ask? I can't remember. Okay, so that's why you like FF. Let's see. I should comment on my part. I've been an FF fan since I was a kid. I think 6 was the first game I played. It was technically 3 on the SNES, so I have a strong attachment to the IP. That's what immediately drew me in. However, playing it, I do really appreciate the way it works as well. I like the stack. Like you said, I really like drawing 2 cards a turn. I like that you can discard them for CP, because in Magic, if you got unlucky enough to not see a single land in your opening hand, and let's say you're stuck with that for whatever reason, you actually can't do anything. Whereas in FF, even if you get a bad opening hand, you don't see any backups. All right, well, I can at least jam out this forward. It doesn't feel good, but
play the cheapest or scariest card that's in your hand.
Exactly.
And see if that will buy you enough time. Yeah.
Yeah, I really do enjoy that. I do think, for the most part, their theming is actually quite good. Again, it helps more if you know the characters, but as far as what the cards do, they usually relate to what that character can do very well, or how strong that character is.
I've talked about my pet boy, Robel.
Yeah, exactly. And I love Robel because Alex said it in our review. I said, what to me what was so interesting about him is that he's not just a guaranteed, hey, you play him anytime and he's always amazing. You really want to see that crystal to get that entry effect. However, if you don't, you can still play him and then start getting him the value of the backup recursion. So, and Alex he put it so succinctly, because I always overword everything. Alex said, yeah, you have to earn it. It's something you invest in and you have to earn it. And I said, yep. And he said, and there's a lot of things in the game you don't have to earn, and you know what those cards are. But yeah, that's what makes Robel cool, is it's a good reward, but you got to earn it. You can't just, Robel turn 1 there, I've won the game.
I think that I've appreciated more and more that Robel can kill monsters. It feels very, very good for Robel to kill an Atomos.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, send that card to the void. Well, and that's interesting too, thinking of Atomos as we wind down here. As limited as the design has been for something like Ice or Lightning, where they can't really seem to come up with a new mechanic, here's like Spectral Keeper. It dulls things. It's like, okay, we have so many things that dull things. I don't think Lightning needed. You know what Lightning needs? More things to dull. In a weird way, I kind of think they've hit that with Wind too. Is like, more reactivation, everything react. It's just like, okay, do you have anything? I don't know. I don't know if that's limiting or not. But
between these two things, the big difference between these two effects is that dulling down your opponent's stuff matters because there needs to be stuff there. If your opponent isn't playing forwards, or if your opponent has got too many things to dull, or their opponent's forwards are so insignificant that you don't need to dull them, then Spectral Keeper doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
But Atomos, the proof is on you and how you've built your deck. And because it focuses on the stealth rather than your opponent, it is an uninteractive card. And I think that makes it so much easier to extort for crazy value. I just wish there was a more consistent and ultimately harsh rule for these effects that count the number of casts per turn. It's super weird to me that Rosa doesn't count if she is the 3rd cast or the 5th cast, and Atomos isn't the 2nd cast, but the New Zidane can be your 3rd cast. The inconsistency in templating there. I get it. I understand why it is the case from a rules perspective, but I do wonder why those rules were there in the first place. And the sort of cast cards are all a little bit strong because they play so much into Wind's strengths. Even like Legend Ash. At the time, I thought, this is okay. I've thought, this is okay all the way through to Opus 16. But it's very frustrating when this comes down as part of an ever accelerating engine. Now that we've got Atomos and stuff, it's crazy to me. There was a regional in the middle of England that took place recently, and the finals was between Icewind and Tross. Makes sense that the good decks rise to the top. And the Wind player, or the Icewind player, in one game went turn 1, pitch, Chocolate, pitch, Ash, pitch, Zidane, steal, attack, steal, draw a card at end of turn from Ash. And it's like, you played 3 things and effectively drew 3 cards that turn. That's crazy. And if you wait for more than another turn or something, Ash is going to be untargetable by abilities. It's like, why are there so many words on Wind cards?
Yeah, that is a great. Put that on the plaque.
It's not just that they are lots and lots of words, but so many of Wind cards focus on you and yourself, and you know what's in your hand, and you know if your combo is going to go off or not. And basically the rest of the monsters don't focus on the self. Even Tross, Tross is great, but if your opponent doesn't have forwards, or your opponent's not attacking you to enable the damage 3, it feels like a much weaker card, And Hades as well, it does sort of focus on yourself, but the animation effect is very contingent on there being things on your opponent's field, things you can attack into, things that you can damage and target with abilities and stuff like that. And I think that the lack of dependencies on wind cards that are not on your side of the field, it's a little unfair, and it's the lack of symmetry in what is otherwise a cycle of similar cards.
That was brilliant. I hadn't even considered that, but I really like that. Yeah, and you're right that everything else, Jin, deal extra damage to them. Spectral, deal, Biblos, dull freeze them, Tross, bounce them, wins it. No, just take care of yourself. Just worry about yourself. So great, brilliant
Focus
point.
on you.
Yeah, brilliant point to end on. Steve, you are so generous giving me all this time today. I know I love hearing it. I'm sure hopefully the fans love hearing it because you are Mr. YYT. Any final thoughts you want to give? Shout outs, future for YYT, anything you want to bring up?
Shout out to, in particular, the Sect of Thornton. I might get attacked for saying this out loud, but this is like the hidden shadow cabal of the YYT that take things super tournament seriously, and it would be very hard to prepare for big events if it wasn't for them. So you know who you are. I can't name names. It's like, secret society at Yale or something. You've got to have your dark hood up. So.
Awesome. Well, then praise be to the Sect of Thornton.
And also to my wonderfully tolerant girlfriend, Sarah, who has practiced with Soirees against me. Either I was the Soirees player or she was the Soirees player more times than any human should have to.
Yeah, that's a big investment, so that's wonderful, man. Well, thank you so much for being on here. I always love getting to talk to you. I love seeing your video content. I can't wait to see the band list. And yeah, folks, if you're not subscribed to YYT, but you're watching me for some reason, I don't know what you're doing, go check them out. They won't steer you the wrong way. So, Steve, thank you so much. And as always, we'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye.